Welcome back to the Big Weekend Show. Millions of Americans will have to show their IDs to fly back home following the Thanksgiving holiday, but not illegals. They can pass airport security checkpoints using either the CBP-1 app or immigration forms. This comes as new ICE data obtained by the New York Post reveals that nearly 670,000 migrants in the United States are either convicted felons or facing criminal charges. Over 58,000 of those are reportedly roaming the streets of New York City, and more than 1,000 of them are either suspected or known gang members. I mean, Charlie, we also saw this Homeland Security Inspector General report talking about how high-risk migrants have been able to enter the United States without proper ID and to, roam the country via domestic airlines. I mean, good luck doing that as an American, trying to get through some of these checkpoints. So why are Americans on the receiving end of more scrutiny than illegal aliens in this instance?
Well, the good news for the illegals is they could also vote in most Democrat states without an ID either. I just chalk these up to these the list of things that we're going to look back at in 10 years and marvel at that you actually had a major party in the United States defending, whether it's not having to show ID to vote or allowing an invasion at the border, again, without IDs, and then having taxpayers flying people all over the country without ID. It's kind of amazing. The good news is I think that this was probably one of the three biggest issues in the election. Americans voted against this nonsense, and I think that we are emerging from the insanity.
Yep. Well, and Tom, we look at, you saw some of those numbers with the criminals that have been able to enter the border. It takes me back to after the Lake and Riley trial of the MSNBC headline that said Lake and Riley's killer never stood a chance. Not that Lake and Riley never stood a chance, but her killer, her illegal immigrant killer, never stood a chance. And it just shows you the worldview and the mind of both the media and the left as well, of that somehow he's the victim and not her.
Yeah, and we mentioned this is such a busy holiday travel weekend. I'm assuming that Americans all over are seeing this happening in real time, because I can remember a couple of years ago being in the airport, and it was the first time I saw people holding up a piece of paper to go through the security. And we were all waiting there with our IDs, or we had they were scanning our eyeballs. And I saw a whole line of people being waved through by immigration officials. Wow. And now I see it almost every time I go to the airport. I see people holding up these letters and going through. And I bet Americans are seeing that happening now. And of course, we see that we're flying them all over the country. At first, people thought, oh, these criminals are coming over our border, and then they're just, disappearing. They're not disappearing. They're registering with the authorities, and we're flying them from one city to another. It's unbelievable.
And Julie, more than 58,000 here in New York City. There is a mayoral race, next year. We saw how this shaped the presidential election. Do you think this issue will shape that race?
I think that yes, in the mayoral race, the illegal immigration problem here in the city is going to be addressed. And I believe that a Democrat is actually going to get on board. I don't think a Republican will get elected here, but I do believe that the next Democrat that runs for mayor and gets elected for mayor will indeed make a change, because the Roosevelt Hotel, which we're going to be talking about later, is another example of a hotel completely being taken over by illegal immigrants. As far as the humanitarian crisis on the border, though, I just have to address these videos that have recently surfaced of that one 10-year-old boy who was crying, standing at the border, abandoned, left with no adults. He was holding a cell phone, and he was just left there. No clothes, no backpack, nothing. And this is in the midst of a sex trafficking crisis that we're currently undergoing, with minors being involved, and all these minors that are just being abandoned at the border, and now they're allowed to fly around the country freely with no identification. What in the heck? I mean, how do you do that? Well, how does this country actually take responsibility or not take responsibility for minors? Forget the criminals. The criminals, that's a whole other thing. But the minors, how do we do that?
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Julie, because over the past week, we've seen video of at least 3 migrant children abandoned at the border. Texas DPS is documenting those heart-wrenching moments. Watch this.
¿Te pasaste por el río?
I got no qualms about you showing
Sí. ¿Quién te pasó por el río, mija?
Un señor.
¿Un señor?
Yeah.
Ok, ¿y no fue ese señor el que está allá? ¿No? ¿Y cómo te pasaste el río, mija?
Le cargo.
¿Qué pasó, mijo? ¿Qué traes? ¿Te dejaron solos? ¿Qué?
No me quieren guiar.
¿Viniste solo? ¿Qué tantos años tienes, mijo?
10.
10 años. ¿Y vienes solo? ¿Sí? ¿Y tu papá y tu mamá?
No, mi mamá no va hasta Estados Unidos.
Venezuela, mamá. ¿Venezuela? ¿Sí? ¿Qué tantos años tienes? ¿2 años? ¿No vienes con tu mamá y tu papá? ¿No? ¿Vienes sola? ¿Para dónde vas, mamá? ¿Dónde están?
That's awful.
One of them is 2 years old. We've also seen kids being dropped over the border wall. More than 500,000 migrant children have been abandoned in the United States under the Biden-Harris administration. Charlie, I've talked to the incoming border czar, Tom Homan. He said that finding these children is a priority for the administration. Many are forced into forced labor and sex trafficking.
So this is a child humanitarian crisis that was entirely created by the Biden-Harris administration. And I always think it's so funny that when we get these moral lectures from people who don't support Donald Trump. And I'm like, wait a minute, you voted for this child humanitarian crisis. And even after you saw what they did to the border, 4 years later, you voted for it again. So I don't want to hear any moral lecturing from these people about anything. My only hope is that obviously we cover this stuff as it comes out, and we do it pretty diligently. And my only hope is that because we're outside of an election, that the rest of the media will wake up and realize that since there isn't an election at stake that they have to rig in favor of their candidate, that they'll actually start telling these stories, because these stories are absolutely shocking and stunning. And we're talking at anywhere from 30,000 to over 100,000 children that have just been completely lost. And you have to assume that a huge number of them have been lost to the sex trafficking.
Tom, what do you make of what Charlie said? I mean, do you think the media will start telling the truth about this?
No, and they're going to, the media is going to be lined up against it. They're going to take every opportunity, just like they did in the first Trump administration when they talk about kids in cages. Yeah. And we have this massive bureaucracy of non-governmental organizations that are going to fight tooth and nail to take advantage of our asylum law. That's why we can't just do little fixes. We can't just put up a wall. We can't just have this, remain in Mexico policy. We have to tackle the asylum situation, because people generally, they have this idea that there's such a thing as illegal immigrants, and then there's this other thing that's migrants, that's refugees, and they're two entirely different things with different definitions. And it's really all nonsense, because in this country, we have people who will allow you to claim to be a migrant, to be a refugee, and they will give you, and all these organizations, and they're loaded with money, are going to help you be a refugee and take advantage of our system. So
loaded with tax dollars.
Yes.
I just have to say something. I mean, realistically speaking, okay, first of all, mass deportation is not going to happen. I mean, that's impossible. There's 1.4 million illegal immigrants. They're not all getting
way more than that.
Yeah, exactly. But that's just in the last couple of years. But that's not going to happen. What needs to happen, and you brought up amnesty, and I'm glad you did, because the amnesty program, first of all, would require for these illegal immigrants to actually show up to their court dates or to their appointments. Most of them are gotaways, and they're never going to show up to court. Yeah. So they're going to be forever lost in the system. So then you look at the tens of thousands of people who are actually in the system and are going to do it the right way, even though they came in illegally. You put those on the side, and then you just address the criminals that are in this country, which are in the tens and tens of thousands. Get rid of them, deport them, and then find and there have been 300,000 total children that have been crossed into this country illegally. Where are they? They're in our schools, and we're paying for their free education. That is absolutely unacceptable.
Well, there's been something like 10 million under the Biden administration. Yeah. And also, if you came here illegally, you didn't do it the right way. So I respect you, but I'm personally for mass deportation.
I know, but it's just unrealistic. That's
I don't know about that. I think we've got to have the will to do it. Yeah, we've got to have the will to do it, and I
think it's going to be very hard to find them all.
Put me down for supporting it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.